morning I'm talking about watchfulness, and this is part of the Discipleship series that we're calling it. Let me start with this. There's a quote from Letters of Helena Rourke, and this is from the first volume. And this is what she says about discipleship. Those who have entered the path of probationary discipleship must go through many tests before they can hope to be considered as eligible for real discipleship. I really like that statement for many reasons, but essentially for those of us that enter the path of spirituality and make a commitment this life or previous lifetimes that we wanted our incarnation to be purposeful. And that purpose is 99% of the time to engage in service. Service to hierarchy, service to the plan, service to humanity with the underlying purpose of evolution. And to do such a thing, to enter such a challenging and difficult path, requires much from the individual. Not only the individual, but the group of individuals that are making such a commitment. But what happens over time, that I've observed anyway, is that the individual or the group, or perhaps even a nation, begins to lose sight of what true discipleship is. That it is a process. Initially, it is a process, and that process eventually takes you to what Helena Rourke is saying, the real discipleship. So I keep reminding myself that it really, for me anyway, it really doesn't make any difference whether I'm on the probationary path or on, or whether I'm eligible for real discipleship or not. To me, it's to remember the purpose, to remember that commitment that I made several incarnations ago. And in order to be the best server possible, to let the great ones, let the initiates and senior disciples, and our solar angel provide tests along the way to refine, our nature. To present tests in such a way that we're anxious to get rid of our ego. That we're anxious to eliminate our vanities. And that doesn't mean that we become a non-entity, it means we become real. When we lose our vanity, when we lose our ego, meaning that our ego is no longer that command center, that ego no longer reacts and controls and manipulates life and people. At that point, when our ego is diminished and our vanity is gone, it's then our whole instrument becomes in tune with what? With the plan of hierarchy, but it first has to be in tune with something greater than itself. Our soul, in other words, has to be in harmony, has to be aligned with the greater self, with the all self. And that's where the master steps in. This is where the ashram steps in. That as we allow these tests to refine our beingness, to eliminate ego, to eliminate vanity, the light that comes from the ashram, from the hierarchy, from the plan, from the master, activates our purpose. and it brings light, brings it to light, brings it to the light of our consciousness. It's quite remarkable. At times it's painful, and the reason it's painful is because our sensitivity increases, like we were talking about in the meditation this morning, that we begin to feel the pain and suffering of humanity. We begin to feel the pain and suffering of the abuse of animals and the slaughter of animals and the raping of the planet. It almost becomes overwhelming at times, so overwhelming it's because it's so much greater than ourselves, the experience. But the beauty is we're no longer just slaves to our personality, slaves to our physical apparatus. We are ignited, we're illumined by the solar angel, by the master, by the ashram, by the great ones, and there's our fuel. This is the fuel that energized Mother Teresa. It's the fuel that energized Saint Sergius. It's the fuel that energized the Rourkes and those whose lives we study and try to emulate to a degree. So where the pain and suffering and the sensitivity is heightened, we have on the other side, the examples of these illumined ones to teach us how they handled it. And so we have the biographies, we have the stories, we have the teachings of how they handled it. So these are important things to remember. And going back to her letter, where Helena Rourke said, those who have entered the path of probationary discipleship. See, that's important to realize. Probationary discipleship is so important. We must go through many tests before we can hope to be considered as eligible for real discipleship. So it's not a position of power. It is a process where we have the courage, the daring, the dedication, and the devotion, to move on to this path of real discipleship. Okay, so today the focus is on watchfulness, discipleship and watchfulness. Disciples are light bearers. They are light bearers. They distribute their light into the ordinary world, the world of humanity, the world of life as we know it on this planet. The source of their light, the source of these light bearers, is the community of brotherhood, the spiritual hierarchy of this planet. It is from this super-mundane source of light that disciples distribute the light as light and love and power throughout the world. Disciples are recognized by many signs, but the most essential, as we have been taught, is beauty, goodness, righteousness, joy, and freedom. It's important to take some time, I believe, to think about these signs, and also called principles of beauty and goodness and righteousness and joy and freedom. Because a disciple, their blood is made of these 5 principles. A disciple is made of beauty, is made of goodness and righteousness and joy and freedom. The true disciple is. I think recently the phrase is, Michelle Obama coined the phrase, they take the low road, we take the high road, right? The high road is to live these 5 principles, no matter when humanity tries to throw us off course, or an individual tries to pull us into their darkness. Because these 5 principles are part of the river that makes our blood flow. Our only choice is to respond through beauty, goodness, righteousness, joy, and freedom. So, in other words, these 5 signs form the foundation of the life of a disciple. Disciples are part of a sacred community, and we can understand that. You know, a sacred community, it's very exceptional these days to find individuals who are so fused with these 5 principles that they form a sacred community. The sacred community is formed involuntarily. They are pulled into that sacred community because of their purpose, because of that incarnation, that many, perhaps incarnations ago where they made that commitment. And that commitment included a lot of hard work. It's like this in March next month, March 23rd, we're going to be attending the White Mountain Conference. The theme of the conference is self-perfectment. Self-perfectionment. I like to use self-perfectment. See, most people look at you and they look at themselves and they look in the mirror and they want you to know, and they try to convince themselves, I'm it. I'm it. That's the opposite of self-perfectment. It's like in the teachings we're told that self-perfectment is light and self-indulgence is darkness. Self-indulgence is looking in the mirror, looking at your friend, talking to others and making them believe, I am it. That's self-indulgence. And the challenge to be on this probationary path of discipleship is that we can't misunderstand, we should not misunderstand self-perfectment as the process of making ourselves it. Or it transforms or transmutes the idea or destroys the idea, is a better comment, of self-perfectment because it becomes self-indulgence. So we have to be careful if we want to keep this commitment and live the 5 principles, to recognize that these tests that are given to us are not given to us to increase our ego, to increase our vanity, to increase our self-importance, but rather to help us become instruments of the great ones. Like we see so many examples like those that I just mentioned, our great teachers. So disciples become part of a sacred community. Some of these disciples have or will become well known as a result of their talents, as a result of their selfless contributions to humanity. But the majority are unknown. They are unknown except to those who support and lend themselves to their work. They're unknown except to those who support and lend themselves to their work. Those who lend themselves to the labor of disciples and initiates are usually aspirants, or those men and women who are moving through the ranks of servers and will someday be promoted as a result of their aspirations into becoming a more responsible disciple, or more responsibility in their discipleship. So disciples are leaders and are comprised of both men and women. Their leadership is normally poured into the various fields of activity around the world, which are related to politics and education, communication, the arts, science, religion, economics, and their various subdivisions. There are many grades of disciples, from the aspirant stage on through the advanced stages of the initiate. These different stages are recognized through the level of their contribution to these 7 fields. See, it's not, their stage of advancement is not determined by how loud they speak about themselves, or how much they convince you that they are it. It's by their level of contribution to these 7 fields. So as we progress from one level to the next, our burdens of responsibility are going to increase. If we have not prepared ourselves well, then we're going to gradually find the corners of our foundation unable to support higher levels. So the building's going to begin to lean and then come tumbling down. And we see this happen in the lives, of some people that we know. But if this occurs, then they will need to start the rebuilding process all over again. Sometimes students say, well, I've already read that book. So why should I study it again? So here's the answer. Now that you have studied it, how did you use the information to change your life? How did you use the information to change your life? Don't quote the book to me. Don't quote the verse. Don't quote the chapter. Let us see how that book that you read changed your life. If the information was used to change your life, then read it again, for it's going to take you to the next level. For example, in the book Cosmic Shocks by Torkim Saradarian, you're going to learn about the different levels of discipleship. Also about the effects zodiacal and galactic shocks will have upon each level. Did you know these things? You will learn about the level of crises at each turn of your path of discipleship leadership. You will learn about group shocks. If you are part of a discipleship group, we are living in times now where it would be a good idea to read that book. It tells us about shocks and groups, about karmic shocks, about crises of growth, and about levels and crises. So if you are a disciple, you're never going to say, I've studied that book and now I know everything. Books that have been gifted to us from the hierarchy are not limited by time or age. They are not limited to one read-through and so forth. So let me briefly list the 15 stage of watchfulness that the teaching gives us. Disciples must undergo continuous education. Every field of human endeavor requires continuous education. But in the spiritual life, this education will start at the physical level and then graduates upwards to the emotional and mental worlds, and finally takes us to the supramundane levels. So don't ever allow your ego to say, I do not need to change myself. I do not need to educate my soul. Or to say, I'm done. It is for this reason I wanted to present the Discipleship series this month as a source to inspire our spiritual education and to inspire others to return to the path that they once began with enthusiasm, only later to find that enthusiasm blanketed by living the ordinary life. Okay, the 15 points of watchfulness. This is just, in the brief. The first is a disciple is cautious not to deceive themselves. 2, cultivates a sharp eye through observation. 3, tries not to fall into the traps of his enemies or friends. 4, by using observation, make themselves a cause. 5, a disciple has a plan. 6, they reconstruct their negative emotional reactions. 7, they discipline themselves. 8, they try not to fall into a daydreaming state. 9, they work for unity. 10, they keep themselves above the personality affairs of others and focus on the unfolding human soul. 11, they live in the new light. 12, they do not give up. 13, they face crises and do not run from them. 14, they cultivate right motive, right intention. And 15, they tune themselves with the plan. So I've taken a few of these points to talk about them. The first one is, what does it mean to fall into self-deceit? We must not deceive ourselves, because if we do not deceive ourselves, no one else can deceive us. See, it's so important to think this way, to develop and to educate ourselves and to refine ourselves in such a way that we don't deceive ourselves, and most importantly, that we learn that others cannot deceive us. They may think they're deceiving us, but they're not. See, if we do not deceive ourselves, no one can deceive us. We are deceived only because of our own self-deception. For example, we must be aware of facts about our physical, emotional, and mental nature. We need to check ourselves to see if we are speaking the truth. When we are talking, check ourselves to see whether we are hallucinating or whether we are talking about the real facts that we know. If anyone is talking to us, do not swallow their words like pills. Check them, test them, use discrimination. If you are sick, many of your friends seem to change into doctors. They say, take this herb, drink this tea, and more. Maybe they make sense, but do they really know what the sickness is? And what is the best remedy? What is the source of their knowledge? A friend diagnosed my younger son with a very serious disease, and I asked her for the facts to back up her diagnosis. She said, look, I'm educated as a nurse. This is what qualifies me to make such a diagnosis. So I refused to accept her diagnosis. It wasn't based on fact. And then, so I did a lot of research. I talked to some people and ultimately talked to a doctor to make sure that she was not correct. See, it's like my instinct was, no, you're not correct, because she couldn't back it up with anything except the fact she was a nurse. If I had not followed through to gain the facts, see, this could have had a disastrous effect on my son. See? So that's why a disciple only deals with facts. And of course, then we have to make sure the facts are true. The same thing happens when a conversation in politics is opened. Everyone turns into a politician. They know all the facts. They can solve all the problems. They can remove all the difficulties. And this vanity just goes on and on. A disciple speaks when they know and when it is necessary to talk. If a disciple confronts a question and they don't know the answer, they say, I really don't know. Let me do some research. Let me think. Let me ask those who really know. Let me read about it. A disciple does not live in vanity because they base all their words on fact. A disciple lives in facts and expresses facts because a disciple is a great source of energy. They don't live on the opinions of others. And you can read this in Agni Yoga. There's many, many references to the importance of not being opinionated, not expressing your opinions. And the reason being is because a disciple lives in the light of beauty, goodness, righteousness, joy, and truth. See, of truth, of facts, not opinions. And in their expressions, they become a great source of energy. But if a simple person lies and hurts himself, he affects only a few. This is why the disciple must live a life of responsibility. If an average person makes a mistake, they have 5% liability. But if a disciple makes a mistake, then their liabilities increase to 50 and 60%. It's really important to remember. Okay, that's the first point from that list of 15. The second is a disciple must not be fooled, neither by their enemies nor their friends. Our friends can deceive us because we trust them more. As a disciple, we must always stand on guard. So the motto of a disciple is watchfulness. We must always be on guard. We must neither deceive or be deceived. The third is a disciple must have a plan for their life. Each year, we must try to fulfill that plan. The plan should be based on the 5 principles of beauty, goodness, righteousness, joy, and freedom. For example, a co-worker I know is an editor. She is very hardworking and lives off her income. Yet, when an author approaches her to edit their book, she always uses discernment and discrimination as to the quality and the value of the content of the book. If the content of the book goes against these 5 principles, she refuses the job even though she needs the income. See, that's discipleship. Number 4, reconstructing your negative emotional reactions. Any negative event and your reaction to it obscures your vision and clarity of thinking. Such a condition is detrimental to our concentration. To remove such a condition, if this happens, and you want to remove this condition, find a quiet time to visualize a positive translation of the negative event. Visualize it in great detail. In this way, you have counterbalanced or erased the thought form that was built by negative thought forms or the negative event. You also put your auric mechanism into order if it was distorted by the negative event. So this is important for everyone, but especially the disciple. For disciples of all levels of consciousness are under continual attack by enemies and dark ones who try to throw them off track so they will lose their way, their sense of direction, their life purpose. Throughout the ages, we have accumulated debris in our aura. All the painful emotions, ugly and harmful thoughts, and various pollutions which we accumulated through our anger and our fear and so on, creating a muddy or cloudy condition in the aura. When this happens, neither pranic energy can penetrate, nor can spatial, S-P-A-T-I-A-L, nor can spatial impressions reach us. All cosmic influences will create congestion. All cosmic influences will create congestion, distortion, and confusion if our aura is polluted. Interesting. This pollution can be cleared from our aura by a steady technique of positive visualization. 5, you cannot be a disciple in any field of human endeavor if you do not discipline yourself. To discipline yourself means to bring your physical, emotional, and mental natures and your life, your complete life, under the control of the divine self within. When people touch you, they're going to say, that person is real. And that realness means that you are radiating your beauty. And people are going to see it without you showing off. We are told that the old mystery schools did not give any important knowledge until they were convinced that the receivers of the knowledge would not use it for selfish and destructive ends or to promote themselves. See how far removed we have gotten from this old tradition. I was thinking about, what was that television program that President Trump was back then, where he fired everybody? You know what he taught? The people that he fired were those that did not brag. If you ever saw that program, that's what you're going to see. The ones that bragged about themselves were the ones that stayed on the program and were further promoted. Interesting. So they were using who they were for selfish and destructive ends to promote themselves. The old masters chose only those who were really dependable and lived a life of virtue, and then they only passed them their knowledge slowly and gradually. Discipleship is not just knowledge and education. It is not promotion or position or title. It is factual mastery over our physical, emotional, and mental life through purification and discipline. See, the process of self-perfectment, self-betterment. To discipline ourselves means to bring our nature under the control of our divine self, our true self. I'm running out of time. I have 4 more points. Okay, probably not. But we've gotten quite a few points already. Here's the 6th one. When the New Age disciple faces crises, They use them for their spiritual victories. They understand the purpose. They understand the purpose of crises and wisely handle them to increase their light and to temper their sword of battle. Crises are those periods of time when your karmic forces need to be exhausted. Crises are the times when the extreme danger of degeneration and the great opportunity for regeneration confront you. Crises are whirlpools of energy which are both destructive and constructive. Both destructive and constructive. There are times in which we can fall or enter a greater light. A disciple does not lose their equilibrium when karma takes a heavy burden from their shoulders and gives them greater freedom. The disciple does not lose their head when increasing waves of karma hit their boat at the shore. And this is why, it's because they are tied with the warrior within, and their faith never leaves them. I'm jumping through my notes here. This is a good point. The disciple does not react to a crisis as a personality, but as a soul who is aware of the link that they have with their teacher within, or with the teacher who watches their evolution, age after age. And this is also important, and I'll close with this. At the times of crises, the disciple does not search for artificial help, but trusts spiritual principles and uses them as they face the different tests of the crises. And I wanted to close with another quote from Letters of Helena Rourke. She says, "Many mysteries are in the life of the disciple. The real discipleship," remember when we started out, the real discipleship versus the probationary path? Okay, so the real discipleship, she says, refines all the reactions of a disciple. And then he verily becomes a golden harp under the hand of the teacher. So much joy there is in the unified consciousness, see, between the disciple and the teacher. We have many cases, she says, rather they are constant, when we see the proof of such unity with our old co-workers. Now, I don't know if she was talking about age or those who have been on the path life after life after life. Probably both. Often we hear their voices, she says, and know about their troubles. We also see this sculpture of their spirits. Our letters always answer their needs. Isn't that beautiful? So I wanted to end on that.